The sun was setting behind the mountains, casting a golden glow over the ancient temple. A soft breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the faint scent of incense and blooming jasmine. Inside the temple, seated on a worn wooden mat, was Master Surya, a monk whose presence radiated calmness, as if he carried the wisdom of 100 lifetimes. One evening, a weary traveler arrived at the temple gates. His name was Thomas, a retired man who had spent his whole life chasing success, building a career, and providing for his family. But now, in his later years, he found himself lost. Though he had everything he once believed would bring happiness, he felt empty. His children had grown, his days felt repetitive, and a quiet sadness had settled in his heart. He approached the old monk with hesitation, unsure if he would find the answers he was seeking. Master Surya looked up and smiled, sensing the weight Thomas carried. "Master," Thomas said, his voice tinged with frustration, "I've lived a good life. I've done all the right things. But why do I feel like something is missing?" The monk motioned for Thomas to sit beside him. Picking up a small clay cup, he poured tea into it, filling it to the brim until it spilled over. "This is your mind," the monk said simply, "filled with endless thoughts, worries, regrets. How can there be room for peace if it is already overflowing?" Thomas stared at the cup, understanding the meaning but still unsure how to change. "I don't know how to empty it," he admitted. Master Surya nodded. "Then perhaps, instead of trying to empty it, we must learn to fill it with the right things." He gestured toward the garden outside the temple. "If you plant seeds of kindness and gratitude, they will grow into peace. But if you plant seeds of fear and regret, they will grow into suffering." Thomas sighed. "But how do I change the way I think?" "I can't just forget my past," the monk smiled knowingly. "No, but you can learn to see it differently." He placed a hand over his heart. "This is where change begins. Not in the past, but in how you choose to see the present." Thomas looked at the monk, a flicker of curiosity in his tired eyes. "Can you teach me?" Master Surya nodded. "I will share 7 lessons with you. Teachings that transformed my own life. If you are willing to listen, they may help you find the peace you seek." Thomas took a deep breath. He had come here searching for answers, and now, for the first time in a long while, he felt hope. And so, as the last light of day faded, he listened. Lesson 1. Thoughts are the seeds of reality. The next morning, as the temple bells rang softly in the distance, Thomas and Master Surya sat together beneath a large Bodhi tree. The air was crisp, and the sound of rustling leaves filled the silence between them. Master Surya picked up a small bowl filled with seeds and placed it in front of Thomas. "Take a look at these," he said. "If you plant an apple seed, what will grow?" "An apple tree," Thomas replied. The monk nodded. "And if you plant a thorn bush?" "Well, thorns." Master Surya smiled. "Exactly. Your thoughts work the same way. Every thought you nurture is like a seed in the garden of your mind. If you constantly feed your mind with anger, regret, and fear, you will cultivate a life full of suffering. But if you plant seeds of kindness, gratitude, and wisdom, your life will blossom with peace." Thomas frowned, looking down at the bowl of seeds. "But I can't control what thoughts come into my mind. Sometimes, negative thoughts just appear." The monk chuckled. "Ah, but you can choose which ones you water." He reached for a small watering can and poured a gentle stream over a tiny sprout growing nearby. Some seeds will always be there. Doubt, worry, even anger. But they only grow if you give them attention. If you ignore them and instead focus on nurturing thoughts of compassion and patience, then those will be the ones that flourish. Thomas thought about his own mind. He often replayed past mistakes, worried about things he could not change, and held on to regrets like old possessions. He had been watering the wrong seeds for years without even realizing it. So, how do I plant the right seeds? He asked. Master Surya picked up a handful of soil and let it run through his fingers. Mindfulness, he said. You must be aware of your thoughts without letting them control you. When a negative thought arises, don't fight it, don't judge it, just observe it. Ask yourself, is this a seed I want to grow? If not, let it go. Shift your focus to a thought that brings you peace instead. Thomas nodded slowly. I think I understand. It's about choosing where to put my energy. Yes, the monk said. It's not about forcing yourself to be positive all the time. That would be like planting flowers in poor soil. Instead, it's about creating the right conditions. Through meditation, gratitude, and kindness, you enrich the soil of your mind. Then, the right seeds will naturally take root. Thomas took a deep breath, looking around the garden with new eyes. For the first time, he realized that peace wasn't something that just happened. It was something he could cultivate, one thought at a time. And so, he made a silent promise to himself to become a better gardener of his own mind. Lesson 2. Choose your inputs carefully. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the temple grounds as Master Surya and Thomas walked along a narrow stone path. The air was filled with the distant sounds of birds chirping and the occasional rustling of leaves. As they walked, Master Surya pointed to an old well beside the temple. Long ago, this well provided the purest water to the villagers, he said. But over time, people began throwing in trash. Small things at first, just leaves and twigs. Then came dirt, scraps of food, even dead animals. The well, once clear and life-giving, became murky and undrinkable. Thomas nodded, intrigued by the story. So what did they do? They had two choices. The monk replied. They could continue drinking the polluted water and suffer, or they could cleanse the well, remove the impurities, and guard it from further contamination. He paused, then looked at Thomas. Your mind is no different. Thomas furrowed his brow. What do you mean? The things you allow into your mind shape your inner world, Master Surya explained. The books you read, the news you consume, the conversations you engage in, all of these are like water entering your well. If you constantly take in negativity, gossip, and fear, your mind will become cloudy, restless, and anxious. But if you fill it with wisdom, kindness, and truth, you will cultivate clarity and peace. Thomas exhaled deeply, reflecting on his daily habits. He spent hours watching distressing news, engaging in negative discussions, and scrolling through social media filled with anger and division. No wonder he felt so drained. So, how do I clean my well? He asked. Master Surya smiled. Start by becoming mindful of what you consume. Pay attention to how certain information or people make you feel. Does it uplift you or burden you? If it brings you peace, continue. If it fills you with anxiety or hatred, consider letting it go. He gestured toward the temple garden. Surround yourself with what nourishes your mind. Read teachings that inspire wisdom. Spend time with people who uplift you. Listen to music that soothes your soul, just as a garden flourishes when tended with care. Your mind will thrive when you choose your inputs wisely. Thomas sighed, shaking his head. I never realized how much junk I've been feeding my mind. The monk chuckled. Most people don't. But once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The question now is, what will you do with this awareness? Thomas looked out at the horizon, feeling a shift within himself. He had spent years allowing the world to dictate his emotions, but now he understood. He had the power to choose. And with that, he made another silent promise, to guard the well of his mind, to nourish it with wisdom, and to filter out what no longer served him. Lesson 3. Turn off autopilot thinking as. The evening breeze rustled through the temple courtyard. Thomas and Master Surya sat in quiet contemplation. A candle flickered between them, casting soft shadows on the walls. The monk, noticing Thomas, lost in thought, picked up a small wooden cup and turned it in his hands. "Have you ever traveled somewhere?" Master Surya asked. "And realized you don't remember the journey? As if you arrived on autopilot?" Thomas chuckled. "All the time. I've driven home from the store and couldn't remember a single turn I made." The monk nodded. "That's how most people live, not just in their cars, but in their minds. They wake up, follow their routines, react to situations out of habit, and go to bed without ever questioning their thoughts or actions. They live life on autopilot." Thomas's smile faded. He thought of how often he had gone through his days, without real awareness, reacting to stress, dwelling on past regrets, worrying about the future. It was as if his mind had been running the same program for years, without him ever stopping to change it. "But how do I break free from that?" he asked. Master Surya placed the wooden cup on the ground. "The first step is awareness. Pay attention to your thoughts as they arise. When someone says something that upsets you, don't react immediately. Pause. Observe the feeling. Ask yourself, where is this reaction coming from? Is it old anger, fear, a past wound?" Thomas sighed. "That's easier said than done." The monk smiled. "Of course. But every moment you catch yourself before reacting is a victory. Every time you pause and choose a mindful response instead of a habitual one, you take back control of your mind." He picked up a smooth river stone and handed it to Thomas. "Imagine your mind is like this stone, resting at the bottom of a river. The water, your thoughts, constantly flows over it. If the water is turbulent, the stone gets tossed around. But if the river is calm, the stone remains steady." Thomas turned the stone in his hands, feeling its weight. "So, I need to become the stone?" "No," Master Surya said gently. "You already are the stone. You simply need to calm the river." Thomas nodded, understanding. He had spent years reacting to life, allowing his thoughts to pull him in every direction. But now, he saw another way. To pause, to observe, to choose his response rather than let old habits dictate his actions. As the candle's flame flickered in the evening light, Thomas made another silent promise. To wake up, to notice his thoughts, and to take back control of his mind, one moment at a time. Lesson 4. Reframe challenges as opportunities. The next morning, the sky was overcast, and a light drizzle fell over the temple gardens. Thomas and Master Surya sat beneath the covered porch, watching raindrops collect on the lotus leaves in the pond. Thomas sighed, his expression heavy with thought. "Master," he began, "I faced many hardships in my life, losing my wife, struggling with my health, feeling like I no longer have a purpose. It's hard to see these things as anything other than suffering." Master Surya nodded, his gaze steady. "Tell me, Thomas, have you ever seen how a blacksmith shapes metal?" Thomas furrowed his brow at the unexpected question. "Yes. They heat it in fire, hammer it, and mold it into something useful." The monk smiled. "Exactly. And do you think the metal enjoys the fire?" Thomas let out a soft chuckle. "I suppose not. But without the fire," Master Surya continued, "the metal remains brittle, unshaped, and weak. It is through the fire and pressure that it becomes something strong, something with purpose." Thomas sat silently, absorbing the metaphor. "In life," the monk said, "challenges are like the fire, pain, loss, and hardship. They are not punishments. They are teachers. They shape us, refine us, and reveal our true strength." Thomas shook his head. "But some challenges feel unbearable. When my wife passed away, I didn't feel like I was being shaped. I felt like I was being broken." Master Surya's expression softened. "Loss is one of life's deepest pains, and grief is not something to push away. But even in the midst of sorrow, there is a choice. You can let the pain close your heart, or you can let it open you to greater compassion, deeper love, and a new appreciation for the time you had. Thomas swallowed hard, his eyes misty. So, how do I start seeing my struggles differently? The monk picked up a lotus flower that had fallen onto the wooden porch. Do you know why the lotus is so special? Thomas shook his head. It grows from the mud, Master Surya said. Thick, dark, heavy mud. Yet, instead of being weighed down by it, the lotus rises above, untouched and beautiful. Your suffering is the mud, but it does not have to define you. If you let it, it can be the very thing that helps you grow. Thomas looked out at the pond, where lotus flowers stood tall despite the murky water beneath them. He had spent years resisting pain, seeing his struggles as obstacles. But maybe, just maybe, they were the very things that could teach him, strengthen him, and help him rise. As the rain continued to fall softly around him, he made another silent promise. 2. Face life's challenges not with resentment, but with the curiosity of a student, willing to learn, willing to grow. Lesson 5. Practice gratitude daily. The rain had stopped by late afternoon, leaving the temple garden fresh and glistening. Thomas and Master Surya walked along a narrow stone path, breathing in the scent of wet earth and jasmine. Birds chirped. In the distance, their songs light and carefree. As they walked, Master Surya stopped and pointed to an old wooden bench. When I was a young monk, he said, I used to sit here every morning, feeling restless. I wanted more wisdom, more purpose, more certainty about my path. He chuckled. I spent so much time chasing what I didn't have that I failed to see what was right in front of me. Thomas sighed. That sounds familiar. I've spent my whole life wanting something. More success, more money, more time. And now, when I finally have time, I spend it regretting what I didn't do. Master Surya nodded. That is the mind's greatest trick, always making us believe that happiness is somewhere else, in something else. But true contentment is never found in wanting. It is found in noticing. Thomas frowned. Noticing what? The gifts you already have. The monk bent down and picked up a fallen leaf, turning it in his fingers. Gratitude is not just about saying, thank you, when something good happens. It is about training your mind to see the blessings that already exist, like the warmth of sunlight, the kindness of a friend, or even the simple fact that you are alive to experience this moment. Thomas looked around. The world hadn't changed, but somehow it felt different. The golden light filtering through the trees, the sound of rustling leaves, the cool air on his skin. He had walked past these things before without truly seeing them. But what about when life is difficult? Thomas asked. It's easy to be grateful when things are good. But when you're struggling, how can you find gratitude then? Master Surya smiled. Ah, that is when gratitude is most powerful. When life is hard, gratitude does not erase pain, but it helps you see beyond it. Even in suffering, there is something to be thankful for. A lesson, a moment of peace, a hand that reaches out to help. He turned to Thomas. Try this. Every morning, before you start your day, think of 3 things you are grateful for. They don't have to be big. Just something real. Thomas nodded slowly. 3 things. I can do that. And when life feels overwhelming, the monk continued, pause and ask yourself, what is still good? There is always something. Thomas took a deep breath, feeling lighter. For so long, he had been focused on what was missing, what was lost. But now, he saw a different way. To appreciate, to notice, to be present with what was still here. And so, he made another silent promise. To start each day not with longing but with gratitude. Lesson 6. Visualize your goals as achieved as. The evening light softened, casting a golden hue over the temple. Master Surya led Thomas to a quiet meditation hall. Inside, the space was simple, bare wooden floors, a single candle flickering, and the faint scent of incense lingering in the air. The monk gestured for Thomas to sit. "Close your eyes," Master Surya instructed gently. "I want you to imagine yourself at peace, not struggling, not searching, just completely at peace." Thomas hesitated but followed the monk's guidance. He pictured himself sitting on his porch at home, feeling calm, his heart free from regret and longing. The image felt distant, yet comforting. "Now," the monk continued, "imagine yourself living with patience, kindness, and wisdom. See yourself responding to life's challenges with grace. Feel it as if it is already true." Thomas took a deep breath, allowing the vision to settle in his mind. He had never thought of himself this way before, not as someone who had already found peace, but always as someone searching for it. After a few moments, Master Surya spoke again. "What did you feel?" Thomas opened his eyes. "It was nice, but it felt like a dream. Something I wish for, not something real." The monk smiled. But the mind does not know the difference between a real experience and a deeply imagined one. When you visualize yourself as already possessing the qualities you seek, you begin to make them real. It is like walking a path. You may not have arrived yet, but each step in the right direction shapes who you become." Thomas nodded, absorbing the idea. "And so, instead of seeing myself as someone who is lost, I should see myself as someone who is already capable of peace." "Yes," Master Surya said. "When you visualize yourself as already patient, already wise, already at peace, your actions will begin to align with that image. Just as a seed contains the potential to become a tree, the person you want to be is already within you. You simply have to nurture it." Thomas thought about all the years he had spent doubting himself, thinking he was too old to change, too set in his ways. But maybe, just maybe, he had been looking at it wrong. "So," Thomas said slowly, "if I see myself as calm, I will start to act calm. If I see myself as strong, I will start to feel strong." Master Surya nodded. "Exactly. The mind follows what it believes to be true. Guide it wisely." Thomas looked into the soft glow of the candle and made another silent promise. To stop seeing himself as broken, to stop believing peace was something far away. Instead, he would start seeing himself as already on the path, already healing, already whole. Lesson 7. Cultivate self-compassion. The night had fallen, and a peaceful stillness settled over the temple. A lantern flickered softly, casting gentle light on the wooden walls. Thomas and Master Surya sat in the meditation hall, their conversation winding down to one final lesson. Thomas let out a quiet sigh. "Master, I've spent my life being hard on myself. When I made mistakes, I held on to them for years. When I failed, I told myself I wasn't good enough. And even now, I look back at my life and wonder, did I do enough? Was I enough?" "Master." Surya studied him for a moment before speaking. "Tell me, Thomas, if a dear friend came to you with these same worries, what would you say?" Thomas frowned. "I'd tell him to be kinder to himself, that no one is perfect, and that he did the best he could." The monk smiled. "And yet, you do not offer yourself the same kindness." Thomas fell silent. "In Buddhism," Master Surya continued, "we practice metta, or loving-kindness meditation. It begins with sending compassion to ourselves. We repeat simple phrases. May I be happy. May I be at peace. May I be free from suffering. Not because we are selfish, but because without self-compassion we cannot truly offer kindness to others." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "But isn't that selfish? Shouldn't I focus on helping others rather than myself?" The monk shook his head. Imagine you are carrying a heavy basket of stones. If you do not set it down and rest, how can you help others carry their burdens? Self-compassion is not selfish. It is necessary. When we forgive ourselves, when we treat ourselves with kindness, we create space in our hearts to love more fully. Thomas stared at the floor, his mind turning over the monk's words. He had spent a lifetime believing he needed to be harder on himself. That guilt and regret were signs of responsibility. But what if kindness toward himself was the very thing he had been missing? Try this, Master Surya said gently. Place your hand over your heart. Thomas hesitated, then did as instructed. Now, close your eyes and repeat after me. I forgive myself. I am enough. I deserve peace. Thomas swallowed hard. The words felt unfamiliar, almost foreign. But as he whispered them, something within him softened. Master Surya continued, every time you feel guilt, every time you doubt your worth, return to these words. Over time, they will become your truth. Thomas opened his eyes, and for the first time in a long while, he felt lighter. He had spent years carrying a weight that was never meant to be his, and now he was finally learning to put it down. The journey begins. Within the temple grounds were quiet now, bathed in the soft glow of the moonlight. Thomas and Master Surya sat together for a final time, their conversation coming to an end. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of jasmine and earth. Thomas took a deep breath, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. A sense of peace, not from having all the answers, but from knowing he didn't need them all at once. Master, he said softly, I came here hoping you would tell me how to fix my life, but instead, you've shown me that I was never really broken to begin with. Master Surya smiled. The mind can be our greatest prison, or our greatest freedom. The difference is in how we choose to see. Thomas nodded. He thought about all the lessons he had learned, how thoughts shape reality, how the things we consume shape our mind, how life's challenges are not punishments, but opportunities to grow. He had spent so many years wishing for peace, not realizing that it was something he could cultivate, like a garden, one small choice at a time. So, what happens now? Thomas asked. The monk gestured to the temple gates. Now you go home, and you practice. Thomas chuckled. That's simple, huh? Master Surya nodded. Simple, but not easy. There will be days when your mind pulls you back into old habits, when doubt whispers that you have not changed at all. In those moments, remember, transformation is not sudden, but gradual. Like the way a river smooths a stone. It is in the daily choice to return to awareness, to gratitude, to kindness, that true change happens. Thomas sat quietly, absorbing the words. Then, with a deep breath, he stood. Thank you, Master, he said, bowing his head with sincerity. For everything. Master Surya simply smiled. Remember, Thomas, the answers were never with me. They have always been within you. With that, Thomas turned and walked toward the temple gates, his heart lighter than it had been in years. He did not know what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long while, he was not afraid of it. Because now, he understood, peace was not something to be found, it was something to be created. One thought, one moment, one choice at a time. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect. What seeds are you planting in your own mind? How can you start cultivating peace today? If you found this message meaningful, consider supporting this journey by liking this video, sharing it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribing to this channel. Your support helps bring more wisdom and guidance to those searching for peace. Let's walk this path together. Subscribe now, and let's continue growing.